Hi, everybody. I'm Tia Kansara. This is Replenish Earth Live. And today on our incredible live session, we have Professor Steffen Walz, where we'll be discussing symbiosis, gamification, pattern language, and the arc of completion, and a little dose of Augusto Boal. So I'm very excited to be introducing to you Professor Steffen. Steffen is the director of innovation at Diconium, which is a Volkswagen Group subsidiary that provides services for the entire process of digital transformation. He's an adjunct professor of design innovation at Swinburne University of Technology in Australia. Through Adam Jacobi, who we do the corporate underground with, I was introduced. So thank you very much, Adam. And he also lectures and coaches at the University of St.Gallen's Executive School of Management, Technology and Law in Switzerland. He's the author of Gameful World, published by the MIT Press. Without further ado, please welcome Steffen. Hi, Steffen.
Hey,
nice to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, brilliant. Where are you right now? Are you in Australia?
No, I'm in Berlin.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Great. Our last guest was also in Berlin, Tony.
Yeah, today is the first day that sort of brings the fall. I guess the weather has changed and it's rained heavily, so everyone's like goodbying the summer, and the ice cream parlor just around the corner is closing tomorrow.
Oh, gelato is over, right?
Gelato
exactly.
is over. Yeah, the kids are terrified. What are we gonna do? We had ice cream every day, twice, thrice. Yeah.
This is the thing about ice cream. You know, it's an everyday thing.
It is an everyday thing. Exactly. That's what they tell me. Hey, we're having dinner. Can I have ice cream instead? It's like that thing. It's like it's a snack. It goes with everything.
It does go with everything. It totally does. I wonder what the weirdest ice cream I've ever had is. What about you? What's the weirdest ice cream I've ever had?
Oh, I had weird ice cream in Japan. I think
I was going to say.
I had algae with meat in it or something, or fish. No, it was fish ice cream. It was fishy ice cream.
Are you talking about, no, does it taste like fish, or was it an actual anchor type thing? So it looked like a fish, but
no, it tasted like fish. It tasted like fish.
Oh, sorry.
And it was, I would try to try everything. Not really everything. I'm too old for that, but in the younger days.
What are you talking about?
I just in terms of, because it was so horrible, right? It was, but I'm absolutely sure that someone really loves it, adores it, and would do anything for ice cream, right?
I think the Italians would. I mean, they did invent gelato.
Oh, they know what they're doing there.
They really know what they're doing. I do miss Italy. Yeah, it's one of my favorite places in the world.
It's so beautiful and so such good food, and oh yeah, I know. And good coffee, but the Aussies do good coffee too.
Oh, really, really good coffee. Yes, they do actually. They've got that sort of like coffee.
On average, yeah.
What's that? There's a really good app where you can find coffee shops locally in Australia, Melbourne.
True. Yes.
They've got the best app for that. I mean, we don't really. Well, at least I haven't come across it. Somebody might tell me.
I know. Well, there's too many. The things I never use that because there's just too many of those places, and you just in the local area that you're living, there's God knows, not just one, plenty.
Plenty. Like bringing it back to, you know, one of the conversations. Like I think we had about 1,000 conversations. We've had 1,000 conversations.
It feels like that.
For me, a great conversation is 1,000 conversations. None of them have ended. So it feels as if we sort of started 1,000 conversations. But
that's cool.
When we're sort of like almost like bringing together a number of different sort of strands. And I think what was really beautiful about one of the things that we talked about was how do you design symbiotically? How do you create more symbiosis? And given your experience across the board, because you're a multidisciplinarian, like you've got all of these multiple topics that you've been toggling. So it's really fascinating to see from this perspective, of course, like where you're bringing these different elements together. So I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Of course, of what can we do to create more symbiosis?
Yep. It's really funny to me because I come kind of full circle with this topic of symbiosis, because when I started out researching, I wrote a paper about symbiosis between computers and ourselves, and specific cars as computers, because I had and still have I guess, a bit of an obsession with individual mobility, coming out of a car making family, typical German. Um, and so that now, and it kind of, it's a topic that's never left me, and the topic of symbiosis is, I think, super relevant in these days, where we're trying to find solutions to the big pressing problems that we're facing: climate change, climate catastrophe, COVID, right? Well, how do we design for something that balances, that there's an equilibrium, right? So symbiosis, maybe I can explain this quickly. And I got hooked by symbiosis because I read a book and a biography about a woman, a researcher by the name of Lynn Margulis. And Lynn Margulis is the most eminent, you could say, researcher in the field. Passed away a few years ago, and she found and made the argument that Darwinism, the evolution of all species, that Darwin was wrong, because Darwin was all about, in a nutshell, competition, right? We, or species, survive because they compete against another, and then only the fittest will survive. And Lynn had this hypothesis, and the hypothesis was, and she put this into this beautiful quote, where she said, life on Earth didn't develop because of competition and because of combat, but because of networking, because of collaboration. And this is, I found, when I read that, I was like, damn, this is a cool and awesome counter thinking way of moving away of the whole growth rhetoric, and the rhetoric of, and growth is per se okay, but growth that bases on combat and on ego cannot lead to something that is good in the end. It will be destructive. I'm exaggerating, but just to read this counter example where it's all about collaboration, that got me extremely interested, because I felt that must be the truth. If there's anything in science that's truth, there isn't, we all know, but it felt like a good alternative of way of thinking about things. And so in symbiosis, very briefly, there's different forms of symbiosis, right? Meaning the living together of two organisms. And we can imagine all kinds of ways of how organisms live together. We could imagine lice living on my head. We could imagine
Bacteria, virus,
that's it.
fungus.
Virus, fungus. Fungi are very typical forms of symbiosis. We can imagine the clownfish and the anemone, Dory and Nemo and all that. So that's forms of symbiosis. And some, and this is very important, some are mutualistic, right? Both benefit. Clownfish and anemone, awesome. Some are parasitic, where the parasite damages the host. And if we assume that we live on an organism made of organisms, planet Earth, then I do think that we're a parasite as a species. And to me, the question is, what are other forms of symbiosis where there's no damage or there's a mutually beneficial relationship? And one that we talked about in preparation is the so-called commensalist type of symbiosis. Commensalist meaning come together, and mensa, the table. Everyone sits at one table, but no one is harmed. And so one of the examples of this is the barnacles, the shellfish that live on whales, right? They suck on, they spend time. The whale doesn't really care, but it's good and they basically live on the whale because this is really super awesome for them because they can filter the water and because the whale is moving all the time, right? So this is a form where I'm thinking, how can we learn from nature to design systems where, and I mean, yes, in my craziness, I'm trying to think very big but also very small. Could this be an approach in design whereby we could learn to design for collaboration that is good for us as a species and where we're, well, saving our own going extinct on this planet? Because the planet doesn't need us. And that's a steep hypothesis, but I think we can learn a lot. And well, if you look at architecture and all kinds of design disciplines, there's a long existing paradigm called bionics, where we look at, we mimic from nature, something that we've learned. I don't know, the design of helmets is based on eggshells, right? That kind of stuff. So I do hypothesize that there's something in there. And I don't know yet what that is and how we can more precise that. But I think that, and we can apply this to a lot of questions. Game design, we'll talk about games in a second, where there's games that are driven by competition, and then there's games that are driven by collaboration. This is the starkest possible contrast. But I think that there is a lot of games that do purport ego. And I don't think this is a time for ego. And I'm egoistic in many ways. This is deeply human, because it's all about survival. But we have to learn to collaborate. And this is something that I find very interesting in symbiosis.
It's interesting that you were talking about collaboration and also the sort of existential crisis of humans on the planet, as well as the ego. And you've basically touched on topics that, quite interestingly, have been from the previous conversations. Merlin, Sheldrake, we talked about the Earth and our dependence, interdependence with it, but that the fungi would survive even if we died, whereas if the fungi died, then we wouldn't live. And then we talked about the sort of symbiotic relationship that we have with the planet in terms of the existential crisis of the ego and climate change, and of course our kind of relationship with the almost the id and the super id in terms of the psychoanalysis, and actually shared this on my Instagram about the sort of the relationship that we may that don't allow basically your ego to capitalize the planet, because it's that sort of almost like the use of the planet, the utilitarian relationship that we've created with the planet that could actually harm us. So symbiosis, especially when it comes to design, gamification, for example, could be really fascinating because it's got this whole behavioral science approach. And of course, you've got the Greek, my friend Alexandros would sort of like remind me that you've got agonismos and synagonismos. And it's about competition to kill, kind of like Gladiator, and or competition to sort of help others survive. So it would, like, you go into Gladiator ring and one of you would come out dead. And another example of that is basketball, where both of you, if we were competing, there's a ball there, but whoever puts the ball in wins, but we're competing, but the game always wins, even though we improve our game.
This is typical game design questions that you're formulating. Ultimately, what you're describing right now in game design is what we call the interaction mode. Is there a group versus group, maybe group versus system? Or is it one against one against many against the system, like in a lottery, for example, single player, group of people, system that you're trying to beat, right? So these are classical questions. And yes, if you only look at that, you could say, yes, there's many types of collaborative type of games, and they're out there, right? And people enjoy them. But there's lots of games that are about one against the other, and where the winning condition, this is exactly what you described just now, the winning condition is to be combating and defeating and exterminating the other party, right? Whereas maybe this is about survival, group survival. I brought a game. Can I show this now? I think it's a good time to show this, where this is exactly
do it.
Utila.
Oh my God.
So this is the German language version. So you guys in the English-speaking countries, you know this as Pandemic. And thank you. So this is a board game, and in this board game, and this is very fitting, of course, because this is exactly what we're having at the moment. So sorry about that.
Da-da-da-da.
Da-da-da-da. There you go. Come on. Self-fulfilling prophecy, anyone?
No, but wait. What's the game about? Because I mean,
Yeah.
like watching the Pandemic movie was already kind of, very telling.
Very telling. Well, the game is about a group of scientists that are bonding together in order to defeat a certain type of threat, a viral threat, or it could be also different types of things. This game exists in different forms, but this is sort of the legacy version of it. Is you have to bring together a group of people, and your objective in the game is to be able to basically win over the threat together as a bonding group. And that is exactly what I think, to come back to the question of symbiosis. I think that is this way of playing. And have you played this kind of game where you play together with other people and you have a shared objective, and it could be a board game, or there's video games, exactly, online. If you think about it, massively multiplayer games oftentimes have these scenarios, mods, or whatever levels, where you have to battle together one big villain, right? In the end, World of Warcraft does this, and many other games do that. So I think that there is a whole catalog of these design principles, and the question is, again, what can we learn? I want to, sorry, before I say that, I wanted to show a different example. That's a video game. This is an iconic and cult game, one of the best games ever made, video games.
Ooh,
I think
it's called
Eco, and made for the PS2. For those who weren't born yet, in 2002, I think, this is when the game came out. So in this game, this is a different type of mechanic, how you can bring out, I think, this less ego-driven view.
Group approach.
In a way, the group approach, the networking approach. Lynn Margulis would say the networking approach. And I want to say this again, let this sink. She said life on Earth didn't develop because of combat, but because of networking. And if we look at what we're having right now, we need to listen very carefully to what she said. And she said this because this was the finding of her research, seeing this is how things have been working really well in evolution for millions of years. So in this game, you are a guardian of you play a boy, comes to a castle, and then Eco. And the boy Eco, he then discovers that there is a shadowy figure, like almost like a ghostly kind of girl, right? It's a boy meets girl story. Yes, we like that too. And he helps her, and she helps him, but he mostly helps her because she has to flee, because she, it turns out, is the daughter of the queen who owns the castle and who wanted to slaughter Eco. And she really doesn't like the fact, and also she wants to kill her own daughter, which is worse, which is the reason why Eco takes her out. But the beautiful thing about Eco is they're holding hands. Sorry, I have to move over here. They're holding hands, and when they let go, you can't continue to play. You have everything you do in the game, you have to make like, I don't know, crossing a bridge, or like a gap. You have to think about, this is parts of the puzzle, of the spatial puzzle in the game, is how do I cross this bridge, but how do we cross the bridge? And this is built into things that you have to then do. You probably have to let go, and if you let go for too long, she fades away. So you only have a certain amount of time, all this kind of stuff. So it's beautifully made, and it's very clever game design, and it gives you an intrinsic motivation. I mean, game design is all about motivational design, right? And oftentimes when people talk about gamification, something that makes me also almost, well, not angry, but because I'm too old to become angry about these things, but kind of makes me upset, I guess, is talking about so-called extrinsic rewards, right? You get a point for that. This is not what it's all about. Games and good, well-designed systems are about triggering intrinsically in the player, in the person who participates, that they really want to be part of this and they like the story. And in this case, holding hands, boy meets girl, you do this together. This is something that speaks to our hearts. And only then, if then the mechanics around that are well designed and well tested and they work, then it's a well designed game. And then you can put on the extrinsic motivators. Yeah. So this is a cool game. Beautiful.
Feels like
It's not a
there's
cool
a
game, it's a
lot of
beautiful
like
game.
it feels
Pardon
like
me?
there's a lot of sort of like equilibrium sort of creation, offering
Yes.
a number of different sort of choices, training people to balance the sort of difficulty of not just it being a game and it is a sort of an artificial augmented, situation, but it's almost like you're empowering people to behave in a particular way, as you said, the sort of like psychological balance between that which gives a positive trigger, a trigger to go and do something, and then
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity to kind of move that with the positive sort of psychology, because if I don't feel good, I'm not going to play this game. So there's a you're satiating, like you're satisfying a need in me.
Yes.
So I'm curious, like, how is that need understood, and what is that? Yeah, how does a game designer, right, create that appreciation for not just the internal landscape, the kind of the internal journey, but
Mm.
also the external gratification that they're getting even within the game.
Yep. As you said, lots of this stuff roots in psychology and behavioral psychology. One big and known example is the so-called compulsion loop. We find this in social media too, where you get likes that probably releases dopamine exactly, and you go back and you go back. So, like by quoting that, by mentioning that, I also do point at the possibility of game design designers and games to create types of or to inhibit addiction. Because that's what these types of compulsion loops do, right? In under certain circumstances, right? It has to be, the context has to be right. I don't know, lots of things why players become that, but it's true, they do. And it's true that game designers work with that. Game designers usually are about, and you mentioned this also briefly, they're about balancing difficulty, and they're also about trying to figure out when is it good to, when and where and why, because of which meaningful choice that I've inserted into the game, is it a good time to reward the player. And then it's all about anticipation too, right? Anticipation towards something that you genuinely want to do. And as I said, one of the true reasons why people turn to a game and why a game is well designed is because they just like it. There's a good story. There's save the princess or save the prince, or the save the group of princesses and princes. We talk about groups games. That would be a new way of looking at things, I hope. And there's lots of thinking about, again, balancing the relationship between skills, stuff that people can do in games, and the difficulty and the mastery that people have. So it shouldn't be too hard, but it also shouldn't be too easy. Somewhere in that channel. That is psychology, positive psychology, as researched vastly by Mika Csikszentmihalyi. There's lots of knowledge coming from behavioral psychology, which is more in the Pavlovian sort of conditional psychology, thread, I would say. BJ Fogg in Stanford is one of the people who's been doing research about this extensively, specifically in the context of digital technologies, where many of his students have become people who work for all the big companies that want your data. And they want your data and they get your data because they know how to keep you watching Netflix and binge watching and coming back to social media. So, but these are not games. This is just very simple and very snackety knowledge about what are primers and what are triggers. And then, yes, many people and many companies are trying to build systems around that, no doubt. But these are, as I said,
Sort of
not
like
games.
junk food.
Pardon me?
Sort of like junk food.
Yes, exactly. Sort of like junk food. And now games can be enormously powerful to motivate people and to engage them into topics. And they can be the extreme opposite. That's the old dialectics that come back as so many times. They do come back, dialectics of stuff that you do and stuff that you hone, and so that's why as game designers, and this is, I think, very important, that as a game designer or a designer or maker of stuff, you need to know why you're doing it, what your true ethics are, right? A colleague of mine once said, gamification per se is not good or bad, right? The question is, what's the ulterior motive? As always, why are you doing it? You want to suck out the data? You want to make people feel addicted to stuff? That's exactly what you want to do? To make a lot of money of them? Well, here's the here's the path. That pathway is for you, my friend. And so I think, I mean, the hypothesis that we have and I have is games are so cool in making and engaging, communicating topics like the big topics that we're facing, the Replenish Earth topics that you're working on, in a novel and unique way to an audience that is very open to interactive experiences and good entertainment. They're fantastic for that. At the same time, they're very, very good and fantastic at hooking people and keeping them away. And if we project a little bit and we look at what people say, what's going to happen with climate rising, temperatures rising, people, what's going to happen? So one of my favorite articles about this is an essay that Harari, the author of Homo Sapiens, wrote for The Guardian, where he said, what's going to happen? People will end up playing games and spend time in virtual reality because they just don't want to face the world, the real world, RL, right? The stuff that we have made, or not them, but my father, your mom. 1.5 generations made this world. Well, this is so tragic, So I think we need to see with, we'll see this with all kinds of media, but I strongly believe that we should use games and the power that they have them to engage people, to change their behaviors towards a better world. And yeah.
There's something about this sort of like oppression. And I feel many of the systems that we've created, as you say, like literally 2 generations, like my grandfather's generation and my parents' generation, they're just 2 generations. But as Edward Gibbons talks about in the Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, normally it's like 3 generations to see the rise and the fall, right?
Yes.
Normally it doesn't go beyond that sort of 3 generations. So it's like, my grandfather's generation, my parents' generation, our generations were busy the fall.
Yeah. Yay.
And it's interesting because now, like the next generation that we have, which is basically, my niece and my nephew, that generation is the one that sort of begins with, the beginning of new systems, new structures, new platforms, new behaviors. There's something about this. Yeah, there's something really cute about maybe even like the theater of the oppressed and how these sort of, entertaining factors, like you've mentioned before to me, these sort of like the manner in which, like even in the 1950s and 60s, this sort of problem solving technique was, you know, was brought into theatre, because that was the sort of the art of the time that would replace sort of the characters with a number of different alternatives. So it's almost like improvising these alternative solutions. And I kind of feel and sense that even in a lot of the sort of games, that you're improvising all these, you're basically scenario planning, you're scenario mapping,
you're doing futures,
you are
you're doing foresight,
you're
you're doing
simulating.
foresight. Yes,
Exactly.
exactly.
That's what you're doing.
It's a big chunk, this is a big part of what I'm doing, really. Like I do this with this deck here, the FutureDeck, where you play out different scenarios. I'll do this again.
Can you show us?
Yeah. So the core idea of the game is that you converge things, pretty much like what I was talking about, bringing two things together or more things that have to work together, and then you create a game idea or a dinner idea or a fashion idea or advertisement, and you've got different markets, medical research, and all kinds of stuff. We've been using this for a few years with many people, from kids entrepreneurs to companies, to create ideas based on this idea of convergence, bringing things together and seeing how they stick out or work out, right? So yes, that also is kind of tying to the symbiosis thing, which I only realized after our conversation. I was like, what have I designed, Steffen? What have you designed that's sort of there? And yeah, exactly. It's funny, but I want to come back to what you said about Augusto Boal. So I know a brilliant film and TV producer, Estella Renner, who will be part of the Creatables conference that we're throwing on the 15th of October. She's the keynote speaker, one of the keynote speakers, and she opens. And Estella is doing not games. She's super interested in games. But she has documentaries on obesity, oversugaring, the question of play and why we stop playing in the public when we grow older. And she's done also flicks, meaning fictional formats. And one is called Aruanas. And I watched that, and I met Estella at a conference, and I was blown away. Why? Because this is the stuff that you'd watch on Amazon Prime or Netflix or wherever. That's high quality entertainment content. And it's so well done, right? Romance, kidnapping, shooting, action. 4 activists, women, go into the Amazonas rainforest and unveil a illegal mining operation. And now here's the part. I'll come to Boal in a second. I watch this and I think, I know what you're doing with me, Mrs. Renner. I know exactly what you're doing with me. You're doing the old Brecht. You're doing the theater where you confront people with exactly what's there, because that mining operation is really there. It could have been a documentary, to see what I'm saying, but she turned the documentary into fiction. And it was so well done that I was like, this is exactly what games should be doing, where they are in not the logic of filmmaking, that's a different logic, but in the logic of interactivity, to tell these stories that are so gripping that people will that way get what they need to change or what's happening, right? And I told Estella then, I looked at her and was like, Augusto Boal, huh? And she said, yes. Why? Because Boal was, as you said, he's a theater maker, his idea was very much in line with the Bertolt Brecht's idea of confronting the audience. He said, if I can't play theater in the theater, South America, regimes, you can't say what you think in public, I'm going to take the theater to the streets. And I'm going to create little scenes, and there's a whole library of scenes, and theater of the oppressed is used widely in also teaching students and actors. And I use this to teach my game design students and my design students to think in these little scenarios and then to throw them out. And then there's a rape happening in the middle of the market, right? In the village. and then see what's going to happen. How will people react? Because they have, as you said, very much like in foresight, choices. And choices have consequences. And what I do in the Boalian tradition is, at the moment, I run a workshop that's called Fall Rise. And what I do in Fall Rise, very simply, is I let people decide whether they want to design a scenario that's totally devastating, everything goes to fucks, or that will create beauty and harmony. And we're talking about the world or a city of the future, that kind of thing. So Fall Rise is exactly doing the Boalian mixed in with a little bit of futures, gin, I guess, liquor, to let people come up, because this is really plays on what the psychologists call self-realization and choice, that we have a choice how we want a future to be designed. So that's why I really appreciate you bringing up Boal. I find him extremely inspiring. That's something we can all learn from a lot. And he was very political. He wanted to like Brecht was so political. Build a better world. We're not, in so many ways, we're not building a better world. We need to. I think we need to. Particularly as an educational practitioner, as an academic, but also someone who works in the commercial world, which I do. That must be the mantra. And I will say this, for a while, I thought that people wouldn't listen. And yes, there's lots of pressures out there in terms of how things work at the moment for many companies, corporations, right? But people do listen, and they do realize that there needs to be a change in how we produce, how we ship, how we consume, all that kind of stuff. And I see this as innovation opportunities. And I don't want this to sound like innovation gibberish, really, like, oh yeah, we'll make something great and new, blah, blah, but really as an opportunity. And in that spirit of the Boalian sort of like, hey, you have the choice, you want this to go to shits, or do you want this to bloom and to be beautiful? I think that's one of the techniques that we can use. Yes.
There's something really key about play, and whether we're playing on a computer screen, like just today we launched our Gather.town platform for Climate Week's final day for the launch with Future Meets Present. And it's an entire, adventure on, online, but it's very interactive. And there's sort of the escapism that we're experiencing, right? The kind of like get away and into a non-reality scenario so that we can kind of like hide. Like, I want to be able to move. I want to be able to get away.
Yeah.
I want to be
That's
able,
the Harari, everyone will wear goggles. And
like, but that's the thing, right? Like, I want to get to the place where I can hide away.
I think it's not only that. I do agree fully, but it's not only that. And play is key. That's really that's the core. And play is key because it allows us to test out scenarios without the danger of truly dying. It's non-lethal.
But it comes back to that, like, you can go through all of these scenarios.
You can go through everything. Exactly.
Yeah, simulate all of them.
And in that way, many of the things apart from this, other aspects in play, really psychologically, evolutionarily speaking, test where the leaf that flows through the air and you follow it and the kids run after the leaf, that kind of stuff, right? Well, that is also because it's about the tactility, it's about learning to interact with a thing, so it's very play is about survival. Scenarios, testing out things, learning how to interact with a system, learning how to master it. And we love that. Why? Because we need to be able to be like that and to be pattern absorbing and processing machines, because play and games are they're sets of patterns that we try to figure out. How does this work? And how can I be really good at it? And that's why play is so deeply humane. And yes, that's why I'm probably so fascinated with it, you know. And and you said something that really is true to me, at least, improvisation. I love to improvise. And I always tell the story where I used to play table tennis a lot, and I was one of the players, and it's really true. I hated to play against other players for points and for the competition and for the winning. And I wasn't like a superstar player, right? I was decent, and I'm still decent, but I had the most fun, and it's about fun too, of course. I had the most fun when I just played for the sake of it. I would test and take shots, etc. Right? And I remember this conversation with when I said, I think I'm just like this type of person. I enjoy most when I just can do stuff and try out, you know, and that kind of stuff. And I'm not
Have fun.
exactly.
That's the thing about joy,
Yes.
right? Like finding your joy, finding what
Mm,
one calls their purpose, like moving away from purpose. Really, it's a sort of what do you enjoy the most? Like what brings you alive? If I were to ask this question
mhm.
if there were one question that I'd love to ask everybody, on the planet, that is, it would be, what brings you alive? What brings you to life? What's bringing you alive? That's the
What's
question.
bringing
Like
you
what's
alive?
kind of like what's
Yeah,
waking you up? What's giving
yeah.
you incentive to get out of bed, roll out of bed, and like go and be
And
or do or see or whatever.
Tia, you're at the heart of the design question that you need to ask when you make a game. What is really, really the core here? Why should the player care? And I will tell you this. I think oftentimes about this different topic. Sorry for being jumpy. But
Go for it.
I think of school education. And I think, I don't know how you were brought up. I was brought up in the classical German school system, not private, public schools, right? So I
I've
will
had
say
the
this,
full whack.
the full whack, yes.
Yeah, full
We
whack.
send our kids to the private school for a few years now, they're at the public school. But what I do realize is if you look at the different types of schools, and I just had a conversation with a friend in Thailand yesterday, whose children are attending a school. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's private, but they're trying to do lots of different things with kids. And one of the things they're doing is they ask this kind of question here that you just asked. What brings you to life? What do you what fills you with joy that you do? And then they try to teach maths, geography, etc., through this lens. And Scandinavian schools do this when they also just ask the kid, what do you enjoy? What do you do for a hobby? And then they build the whole curriculum around this. And there's very different approaches, but they all are kind of anchoring on this thought, more than a thought, this understanding that we share here right now, that people will do stuff and they will do it when they have a true attachment, when they're attuned to the task and do it because there's a true intrinsic way of how they look at it and why they want to do something. And this is oftentimes exploited. It's oftentimes also mistaken. Something like eating more snacks or sugar, consuming more sugar is not to do with that question. That doesn't make you feel alive. But marketing will wants us to think that that is the case. Do you see what I'm saying? Advertising wants us to think that, yes, it's exactly what you enjoy. And this product will make you feel so lively. You know, it's all bullshit. Like
Open a bottle, open a bottle, open happiness.
open hap- Oh my God. And well, but people believe this because they have never learned and they were not in school days, very seldomly, was there someone who said, what do you truly like? And I think we should let more designers speak to schools and to school educators because this is a design question. What's the audience? You know, Microsoft says we're obsessed with customers. we should be obsessed with how we're bringing up our children to bring out the best in them. And that can only happen if we really try to understand their characters. And there's so many different characters. I look at my daughters, they're so different. And we tried to do this. We tried to pull this out. But in a classical school system, this is not done. And you can do this through as I said, the thought that needs to happen is, yes, you can teach geography and mathematics through that lens of my daughter loving to draw and make up little things all the time. She's obsessed with it. This brings her joy, and we know how that is. What's one type of play, by the way? One type of play is not just that people do stuff in play, observe, I don't know, follow, have physical interaction, kick the ball. One type of play is also to see someone else play and enjoy it.
Well, look at all the sports that we enjoy watching.
Yes, true. So yeah, because I was looking for example. Absolutely,
TV.
Yeah, we love it.
So many. Like we like to go there in the person. Like I remember, I remember going to a number of like football matches and arriving and feeling this camaraderie, this sort of like religious fervor, this feeling of connection, despite the fact that all I'm wearing is like a t-shirt, but everybody, and I don't know anybody around me, but we're all in step, almost like this kind of like military marching, all coming out, all dancing, all chanting. And it was this sort of, we are a whole, we are part of this thing, this movement.
There's a word for it.
When you feel and sense it like that.
There's a word for it. Sorry, but coincidentally, I did research a little bit about this. It's called consecrism. Consecrism means that you, as you describe it, that this in a way becomes a religious ritual, and everyone together sort of signifies that the situation you're in is something special, but it's more than just special because it has a beginning and an end. It's a sports match. There's a winner and a loser. It has almost a religious body to it. Consecrism. Yes, that's what the Nazis did, and Leni Riefenstahl also. She's the first who really very consciously used this. If you've watched the movies from the 1930s, end of 1930s, where you see the stadia and filled, and everything's done in torches, torchlight, and all that stuff. That was consecrism en masse, right? And in dictatorships, you see this everyone recurring stadia filled with people and then organized in a certain way that they can see one another, and there's big movements, right? And in opening ceremonies for the Olympics, that kind of stuff, right, is also, we're so fascinated with whole groups moving. Anyways, sorry, I interrupted. But I agree.
Like really fascinating how there's this kind of almost maybe that's the visual on the network that you mentioned before, right? That's the actual visual sense of it. That's the visual relationship with those that are also feeling. What's the point of being in a crowd if you can't have the energy of the crowd? A number of my friends who are in the music industry who've sort of changed their business models from physical gatherings to digital gatherings are questioning, what does it mean to create these experiences online when you can almost not recreate that what you call consecrate. What was it again? Consecrism.
Yeah, I don't know what the adverb would be, but consecrism, Konsekrismus in German, consecrism, when they can't recreate that. But you know what? Who created this? Fortnite with Drake.
Interesting.
Speaking of games, Fortnite are the best in terms of brand collaboration. They bring in so many different brands into the game. It's incredible. Money-making machine that way. There's a company based in LA called Wave. Very interesting. The CEO's name is Adam Arrigo. And I've looked that up because I was looking for patterns. It's so funny. We have a good conversation. I really enjoy that. We had this, I looked up the question of how do you mobilize these big masses? And then I ran into Wave, who do digital event with the means of only stuff that digital can do. Because if you try to mimic what we do when we meet at normal gatherings, exhibitions and conferences, that kind of stuff. That's not the way we should look at that, right? So they went to Fortnite and said, we're going to do this Drake thing, and there will be a gigantic Drake figure, and then there will be ways of how you can. And sorry, I don't think it was Drake actually. I think the wave thing was not Drake. That was someone else. It'll come to me anyways. But they organized, and they do organize this like big spectacles where there's lots of people there, and they do. It's really spectacular, and I do agree with you. That is, what did you call it? You said that's the visual. That's the visual.
Like augment that, right? Like imagine if you were to go into a room and all of a sudden you put your sort of, XR, AR headset on, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, I am not in this room anymore. I am in an altered state.
Yes.
Right? I am in an altered environment, augmented, altered, changed, evolved. So it's like this sort of, I'm in these environments, but this environmental essence, the spatial essence has shifted because the essence of the space is no longer brick and mortar. It has absolutely anything. I can make it as magical as I so wish. So there is this, where am I as a person? Who am I as a person in this space? If I'm not in the normal auditorium, if I'm not in the normal football stadium, who am I? How am I changing? What is my relationship with this physical space if that physical space has a completely different essence?
And how do I have a voice here? How is it still that I can feel myself and be felt by all the others? Classical design problem in large public displays. Seriously, like, the huge displays that we know, there is a body of research in computer science looked into the question of when this screen is shared by many, how do you represent one if only one is there? And yes, they ended up very often with designing group things. Tag of war, for example, in Stadia, where you send an SMS or a text for one party, and then the more texts are being sent, the tug of war goes to either side, right? So either goal, basically. That kind of stuff. So designing for large collaborations, that's definitely a research thread. There were, by the way, also games for Stadia. I'm vaguely remembering. And there's people who did so-called big games who looked into this kind of stuff. And yes, that could be, or that's most definitely something that we will enjoy. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me that there is this it's like the edge of collaboration. So kind of like bringing it full circle, the completion, the arc of completion, the behavior change wheel, the narrative that allows for much of that pattern to be sort of like to complete, because until that pattern isn't complete, until something isn't complete, it doesn't really become something that you can kind of like pattern and replicate or understand or simulate and know that the end result's going to be the same. You know what I mean?
I do. I just looked up and then I'll come to your question or what you just said. I just looked it up. So Wave, the concert that they organized was with what's his name? Sorry, John Legend. They did to Travis Scott. That's the one. Yeah, Travis Scott.
Interesting.
So that was a very big one. So they organized virtual conferences, virtual concerts, right? And that's really the thing. So interesting company to watch. The behaviors that we're designing for, that's what the tech companies do all the time anyways. There was a time when a lot of people who looked at game design said, we don't want to design as game designers for this kind of stuff because games are holy. They're voluntary. We're corrupting the soul of games and the idea of play if we do it, use it in different contexts, right? But and this is a conversation to be had. But then on the other hand, I'm always thinking there was a big evolution in the way that also other media learned to have topics that are mature, and I don't mean adult movies, sorry, but mature, and as in to transport something human and humane, and to let us see who we are and who we're not. We're shortcoming and where we're excelling as people, right? And this is really what films do. And the question is, how can games do that? I think. And that then also to me entails, yes, you can use them in the context of behavior change. You know, I think that there's this researcher based in Britain, Susan Mickey, and she's written extensively about behavior change. She is the go-to psychologist there. And there is, it's sometimes really simple, like with many things. Susan's made this list of what do you need to do and insert into a system so people become more interested in it, right? And I'll give you one example that comes out of this whole behavior wheel and behavior change discourse that Susan is part of. One is set your own objectives. And we, knowing the digital landscape, that sounds almost banal, but it's true. It's a very powerful mechanic. Not to say you need to walk 10,000 steps a day, or I don't know, but you decide how many you walk. Plus, the system wants to know or should know how heavy you are and how fit you are, what your baseline is, basically, in order to make a good and adjusted call to what you really should be doing. But you are the master of disaster, so to speak, in terms of the objective. So these behaviors and using games and play idea and principle, it has to be in the right context. I think that there's lots of examples. If you only look at health and fitness, where this works very, very beautifully. There are a lot of competitive parts to it too, where you compete against someone else running. There's many apps in this of this kind, Runtastic, God knows what, so people do enjoy to compete against other people. I think it would not be good to only have collaboration, because we talked about this quite extensively. But the combat, so to speak, it should not be a real combat. It should be in the service of just having a good time, and moved away from the real thing. Behavior change is something. Then, still, having said all this, we need behavior change, because we have a situation right now where if we don't change our behaviors drastically in many ways, in the way we consume food and the way we produce, we won't have a good time here on this planet.
Well, I wouldn't say that everybody is having a good time on the planet already. So it's a fascinating concept, right? Like who is and who isn't, and like coming back to this sort of like the congregation, right? Like first ever example of the congregation that I looked at, and I was like, wow, this is the first depiction, or amongst the first depictions of a congregation, that being the emotion that an actual audience experiences, right? The group experiences digitally or physically, was I believe in the San Lorenzo Church in Firenze, in Florence. And there was this such a beautiful church, but there was this art piece by Filippo Lippi or Filippino Lippi. I can't remember if it's father or son, but there is this beautiful fresco, and the entire fresco shows one emotion, one experience, and the entire congregation in the picture is all responding to that one item. We're talking sort of 15th century here. So in that one fresco and piece, and then congregations filled with all of these people in an auditorium, to everybody on a digital platform, it's almost as if we've effectively wanting and learning about group or audience or mass emotion. And we're learning to interact with that group or mass emotion within game
And
structures, or
we
whether we're
haven't
talking
yet
about.
figured out. No, you're right. I think we
Yeah.
are. Sorry, I interrupted, but just wanted to say I think you're spot on there, because we're in a way like little kids in a sandpit. We haven't figured out yet. My father-in-law says this so oftentimes. The digital thing, it's good, but it's like the Wild West, Steffen. We have of so many things, we have no clue whilst we're still developing, right?
I think we've
Evolving.
just always been in the wild, wild west. I think we've always
Yeah,
been there.
probably.
Whether
Yes.
you were, imagine being 15th century with no mobile phones, no technology per
Yeah.
se in the way that we experience it, no game
Yeah.
design the way that we've understood social media dilemma. What are you talking about? Data and manipulation of that data. We have continued to be on the back foot when it came to what is effectively those on the edge of the development of human interaction. This is all about the way that we interact and whether we are competing to kill in a gladiator type of game, or whether, like basketball, we're sort of passing the ball and making sure that we're collaborating because the game always wins. Ultimately, we've got to move away from the tragedy of the commons, the idea and the identification in 1833 or whenever it was by a British economist talking, and I'm sure many others previous to him, but talking about the identification of what is communal.
Yes.
Where is the communal, and where does
Yes.
that communal, whether you're talking about the communal sort of the commons being the digital commons or the physical commons or the intellectual commons, like all of these communal places, right? All these libraries that we've ever heard of, even the great Alexandrian library was a
Yeah.
library that came from the human brain interacting with a piece of paper to write it down to communicate. It all came from the interactions of all of these people and the congregation of all of that online, almost like a knowledge base. So no one person owns it. Google doesn't own the data that's on Google, right? We own the information of ourselves on Google.
In theory.
Well,
But
that's
yes,
questionable, but ultimately it comes as the human
I do agree
commons.
with you. Well, they should.
This
If
is what
they
they're in court for, like talking about. Facebook's in court for talking about. Apple's in court for talking
it's
about,
about the
because
commons, yes.
these are about the commons, and it's about the global commons. We're talking about the digital
Yep.
commons. We're probably enforcing a whole slew of legislation that will provide for what is effectively the humane aspects of our interactions.
Well, the faster we do this, the better, because we have pressures, and the pressures are not decreasing, and that's why the communal spirit is much needed. It really ties very well into the beginning of the conversation where we talked about the commensalist symbiotic view, which is a view of, hey, we can be at this table together, that for a while I was very fascinated with different ways of organizing a trade. There's societies that have no money, for example, and they are and I did this because I was looking for the heart of community. And I was looking for ways of anti-capitalistic ways of organizing community, because what you're describing, the commons and this belief, is also, in the West at least, very much tied to the way that we organize our lives and how we organize commerce, and ultimately with capitalism and the capitalist idea. And this would lead too long off, but I'm going to say this. One of the best examples that I found where the community didn't have any money was that people shared stories in exchange for goods.
Cute.
And yes, it's cute, and yes, it's kind of hippie, but it worked. It was an island, very few interactions with the outside, and good life, no threat, as in storms or whatever can happen. And yes, maybe it's really, I do romanticize it potentially, and maybe I don't tell the story right. But what I really liked about that
You've left
was
out the best bits.
yeah, the dirt and the grind and the grit. No. I just imagine someone has eggs and you walk there and go, hey, I have this really good story. I want to tell you this, and can I get an egg for that? So just that situation, I think this is brilliant, isn't it?
Well, now we've got golden eggs in all of our games. So
exactly,
search for golden egg.
golden eggs. Yeah, the golden eggs. The grail, the golden grail.
The
It's not
Holy
golden,
Grail. Oh wow,
the
the
golden
golden
holy grail.
holy
It's not
grails.
golden, Steffen. It's wood. It's made out of wood. Because
on that note.
that's the thing. On that note, but I want to come back. I really liked. I want to tie something to your idea of the communal. What does that mean, commune? We need to. There's super examples also in history. The commune in France of people organizing lives differently in cities. The anarchists who did this in Munich in the 1920s. So there's really good examples of that. But what I really loved about that story with organizing life differently without money exchange was the story element. What I think really drives a lot of things, and when we talk about games, we talked a lot about mechanics today, but we didn't talk so much about stories. I think stories have the power, and we did when we talked about Boal and talked about Estella Renner and that stuff. Stories have the power, and think about this. How cool is this? The magic of a story in exchange for an egg. That could also be another answer, that we need to have very strong storytelling, powerful stuff that moves hearts and minds. I think that is also what brings together communes, like the canonical texts that you have, right, in religions. They're stories. They're bundles of stories. So my question is, where's the good stories out there that really tell this communal aspect? Like we can be strong together. We must be strong together. And it's a good thing, that maybe could be a call, I guess.
Yeah. How about that? Call to action. Where do the best stories lie? In bringing communities together in some symbiosis, in an emotionality that allows us to collaborate in ways that we can connect with each other, that is less about competition, killing one another, but is more about growing and evolving this sense and this pattern of the positive psychology, the positive behaviors, the positive interactions. How can we be prepared with the simulations that we can create through these games, whether they are brand partnerships or the like, that can aid us in this, almost like this camaraderie, less about the oppression, more about this, the digital syncing, right? That how to connect with each other. So on that note, final words, Stefan, what do you think?
It's funny when you mentioned the word camaraderie, and it was mentioned earlier too. I know companies that actually, game companies that are mentioning this, although it's a lot to do with marketing and promoting their product, that they say this is where people hang out, play together, learn to be organized in teams. We're talking multiplayer games, big ones. Not going to mention the name. And camaraderie is a recurring pattern in trying to sell these types of games to schools, even as training grounds so the kids can learn. But there are games that are very, well, not violent, but that are still following the principle of survival of the fittest. So my last word is beware of the, I don't have a good term for this, it would be the equivalent of greenwashing. Beware of someone trying to sell you the snake oil and not just the snake oil of games or game elements being awesome for whatever, because that doesn't work. It has to be about play and, as we found, intrinsic motivation. But the snake oil of doing something that sounds like it creates camaraderie, but it really only does something else, which is selling more of the product. And in capitalism, we find this very often, that people try to sell us something and they make it look great and good, but really it's about their product, and that's what they want. It's not about the idea and the momentum and the ulterior motive that I mentioned earlier. And I think that, to me, is, you made me aware of. I thought of that because I was immediately thinking of a certain game and a certain conversation that I had with someone who worked for that game studio, who tried to sell it to me that way. And now I think in digital and in these times, there's lots of snake oil out there. Lots of snake oil.
And we've got to be aware of it. And we've
got to be aware of
ready.
it. We got to be ready, and not everyone is. That's the thing. People don't have this training. And I regret that I say this now, but you know, I'm the white privileged dude. I had education, although my parents were workers. So I'm the 1% that usually in Germany makes it out of this context and then has a PhD in the end. 1% of all people. But yeah, we gotta educate. We gotta educate people. Otherwise, they will lose track of the world.
We've also got to invite them, and I think that's where games can invite people.
Absolutely.
And on that note of inviting people and giving them the opportunity to explore the narratives and the stories, Steffen, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for joining us on Replenish Earth Live with an incredible and fascinating audience that love to learn about people who are doing quirky, amazing, witty, funny, and joyful things that wake them up and allow them to align with the inner spectrum just as much as the outer spectrum. So thank you very much for your time, Steffen. And thank you all very, very much for joining today. It's been really fun to explore gamification, the arc of completion, a whole slew of theatrical performances and games. And let us know what you think. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube. Thank you all very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you, Tia.